There's a subgenre of visual novels that have seemingly drawn a cult following in the West: the thriller mystery visual novel. Often paired with sci-fi, works like Zero Escape, Infinity, Science Adventure, and the When They Cry series are games that are well beloved by the community. Fans of the games are incredibly passionate and express themselves in many ways. For example, I loved these games so much that I started doing reviews to spread the word. Others took their passions in another direction. If the industry doesn't make all that many of them, what else would a fan do but try to make one themselves? Welcome to Reikaze Reviews, and today we have a review of the Sekimeiya Spun Glass by the Trinite Team. A game that was so focused on replicating those thriller mystery experiences that it ended up having an appeal even narrower than the games that have inspired it. If there's one thing to take away from Sekimeiya, it is that the game is incredibly ambitious. It aims to be just as good as the works it's inspired by, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the production values and presentation. English visual novels have a stigma of being mean games with cheap assets, poor production values, and being generally low quality, so many visual novel fans tend to assume the worst. With Sekimeiya, throw all those thoughts out of the window. The production values of the art, music, game engine, effects, and basically every other aspect is comparable to big budget Japanese visual novels, and even one-ups them in some ways. Sekimeiya takes an old school MVO approach to its text, similar to Higurashi and Yumineko, where the text takes up the whole screen. It's a style that isn't common, so I generally appreciate it for adding flair to the game's aesthetic. As for the rest of the visuals, the general aesthetic of the UI is attractive. The sprites are full of expression and full of detail. There are a ton of backgrounds to help set the mood and location, and while not common, the CGs look genuinely incredible. All of this is to say that the game looks good, but I wouldn't say it looks great. Sure, everything is sharp, clean, and polished, but I do feel like it lacks a distinct personality to take it to the next level. The same goes for the soundtrack. I think that, while the songs are well done, they do leave something to be desired as a soundtrack. There are a lot of tracks, 63 to be exact, and they're from a variety of composers, including the director Adri himself. It doesn't feel like there's that many though, because many of the tracks sound pretty similar. Much of Sekimeiya's soundtrack has the problem of trying to be too atmospheric to the point of sounding uninteresting. Other tracks just don't fit well. There's a ton of EDM music here, and I felt like many tracks just had far too much energy for the situation they were used for. That being said, it is a good soundtrack for the most part. Many of the tracks are just straight up bops. The score does a really good job at nailing the game's atmosphere much more than most of the genre. And there are songs like Fever Dream that really just steal the spotlight. This is a soundtrack I think might be better listened to outside of the game, where the songs can stand for themselves. Sekimeiya shines in its quality of life improvements. It's a game made by fans after all, and these fans have noticed many minor but irritating problems that have plagued other visual novels. It's loaded with features, an incredible backlog, notes, a mini-map you can toggle at any point in time, as well as the entire map in the menu, and as well as excellent controller support on PC. When you finish the game, there's even more added: a robust flowchart, tips, stats on your playthrough, and even more. Sekimeiya relies on some of these to make its experience work, so some of these improvements were a must, but even so, they're deeply appreciated nonetheless. I have to say that I was genuinely impressed by the backlog. It has a built-in search, the ability to jump to wherever you want, filter by name, etc. It's the kind of thing you typically wouldn't think of as a big deal, but really helps with the overall experience. The ambition of Sekimeiya continues with its story, being one of the most complex I've seen in a visual novel. Spend enough time in the community, and you can get a sense of the kind of work that they idealize, which the industry does not provide. Dense, complex mysteries with intricate twists and turns. Well-crafted gems that one can't help but admire. There are very few visual novels like this, and to see an indie team strive for the pinnacle at their first try is exciting to see. But this is also where Sekimeiya starts to falter, being so fixated on mystery to the detriment of basically everything else. Character, engaging banter, pacing, or even the ability to accommodate for different ways to enjoy the game. If you don't like theorizing or looking to solve the mystery of the game, you should really think twice about playing Sekimeiya. Sekimeiya follows Atsuki as he goes with his friend Shiraya to see an event held at the Ashia Tower, the presentation of a rare gemstone called the Sekimeiya. Just as the event begins, the tower is flooded with smoke, and Atsuki becomes trapped, along with 7 other people being stuck in the tower for the next 12 hours. The Sekimeiya is no ordinary gem though, and has powers and capabilities that will make their time in the Ashia Tower unforgettable. There are all sorts of subplots happening behind the scenes, traumas to overcome, and mysteries to solve regarding the unbelievable events that happen. Where this fixation on mystery hurts the most is right at the beginning. It's so focused on setting up its mystery that it fails to become engaging in any way. The opening is awful, a perfect trifecta of boring. The premise isn't interesting, the cast doesn't have any character, and the dialogue is dry and heavy. Nothing is interesting about the base premise. They're just trapped. That's it. With most games in this genre, there's a sizable prologue that gets you somewhat acquainted with the location and cast and to develop the premise. But Sekimeiya skips that. The intrigue of Sekimeiya's story comes from the mechanics of its storytelling and the mysteries that result from the powers of the Sekimeiya, which shows up later on. As a result, the premise at the beginning of this game is very dull, and I really didn't care about things that happened early on. Somewhat decent characters can make up for a bland premise, but Sekimeiya's are not, and neither is their dialogue. Only a handful of characters, Sai, Shiroya, and Kate, have distinct personalities, and no one really changes or grows. Almost all the character interactions are based around the mystery. We never get any real moments of levity to know where the characters are, how they are feeling, or have any banter between them. It's all missing here. This decision leads to a distinct lack of charm in its writing, and it makes it hard to get invested in the cast when they're all somewhat bland. There's a particular character that bothered me a lot in this regard. They were the source of motivation for many of the other characters, plans, and behaviors, but we never got to see any real personality surrounding this character, which made me wonder why other cast members really even cared about them in the first place. Completing the trifecta is the writing style. It's dry and dense. Sekimeiya is full of detail to construct an intricate and complex timeline without loopholes, and it accomplishes what it wants to do at the expense of flavor and conciseness. Ironically, its prose is even denser than the works it pulls from. The writing assumes that you and the characters care about the minute details of everything, and then floods you with more information. For example, early in Chapter 1, the computer in security room and the cameras and controls stops working, and they spend several screens talking about how it stopped working and what they were doing to troubleshoot it. Why does the reader need to know about all of this? It's very bizarre to see a game that's bad in this way. Usually games don't explain themselves well enough. The inherent problem with this is that it leads to a lot of dense, heavy writing that may or may not actually contribute to the plot itself. It's hard to follow when reading because it's so full of information. But when you step back and try to figure out what happened, you realize that not much of substance has been said. That being said, a few hours in Chapter 1, a lot of these problems go away. The premise stops being boring, so the story can start maintaining your interest. The Sekimeiya and the mechanics around it start grabbing your attention. The behaviors of the characters start making more sense. The writing becomes less dense, and less about stuff that doesn't matter. And things start becoming more relevant to the story. The characters are still bare bones throughout most of the game, the writing is still entirely fixated on the mystery itself, and is still dry and overly dense, just less so than the first chapter. Sekimeiya is broken into 5 chapters, each significantly different than each other, with different perspectives and different writing styles. Chapter 2 is fun to see a story from a different perspective, and I thought its twists were very cool. I adore Chapter 3. It's very stylistically different, and all the complaints I mentioned earlier about the character writing doesn't apply here. Chapter 3 is the type of storytelling that I think visual novels do exceedingly well. A deeply introspective, soul-searching story, full of personality and charm. So, to see that confined to one chapter was a little bit disheartening to say the least. If the rest of the game had more writing like Chapter 3, I think I would have liked Sekimeiya a lot more. I thought Chapter 4 was like reading a wiki. It was a fun perspective, but it didn't move the story in any real way. Outside of the beginning of the game, Chapter 5 is another point where Sekimeiya's obsession with mystery comes into play, but depending on how you play these games, isn't a complete negative. With other visual novel mysteries, theorizing is just a side effect of the story. If you get the mystery right, you can enjoy the moment of satisfaction being correct, but if you didn't bother, you can still enjoy the reveal itself. Chapter 5 of Sekimeiya assumes everyone theorizes, bombarding the player with questions about the mystery right before they're revealed. To add insult to the injury, many of these questions are about details you probably don't remember, being extremely specific, little things that aren't important. While you don't need to answer the questions correctly to progress in the story, it still sucks to be told, yeah, you're wrong, and it also kills the pacing of the story. The questioning slightly undermines the reveals themselves on many occasions, effectively making it so you have to theorize and hunt answers to get any real satisfaction in this game. I'm the kind of person who doesn't craft my own predictions, tending to prefer the answer arc ride, when all the mystery of the games get explained in a rush. So when I got to this point, I was thoroughly dismayed by this. While it can be cool to see how accurate you were, it ultimately pigeonholes Sekimeiya into having only one real way to enjoy the game, which is a shame. If you like solving mysteries, none of my complaints here will likely bother you, and in fact, you might like the questions, but it sucks that you have to. Putting these questions aside, Chapter 5 was still a great ride and satisfying to read. All that said, Sekimeiya just kind of ends. There's no epilogue or anything to let you know if after this elaborate plot, the characters are doing well. After all this time poured into this dry cast, the very least the game could have done was giving me some catharsis, some happy end to let me know how the cast turns out. Sure, you can dig around in tips afterward to learn more about the story, which I would highly recommend, but I would have appreciated an actual epilogue here. All that being said, even with all my complaints of the story, I still found the mystery itself and the story that comes along with it to be compelling and engaging. Sure, it's inherently flawed. All of these complaints still apply, but I think the story shines through regardless. The way that this game conveys information outside of the barrage of questions is incredibly satisfying. Twists feel foreshadowed well in advance, but are still extremely satisfying when revealed. There's a surprising number of these twists too, so you're always kept on your toes. There's so much attention to detail regarding Sekimeiya's story that it's really hard not to appreciate the effort. If those small details and mysteries not you like many in this community, then Sekimeiya is going to be a breath of fresh air. The mechanics of this world and the Sekimeiya are well thought out, and it's because they're handled so robustly, so well done that it gives you an aha moment that feels like it retroactively solves many of the problems in this game. Trying to figure out how the events unfolded, crafting a mental image in your mind about the actions and the motivations of your cast, and then seeing an elaborate plan develop beautifully is much more engaging and in-depth than you get in most visual novels. Also, last but not least, I'd like to reiterate that this kind of game is scarce. Honestly, even as flawed as Sekimeiya is, any game like this that does its mystery as well as it does, with this much love and attention put into it, is hard not to appreciate. I want to see the devs succeed. I want to appreciate the hard work and effort that went into this game, and I would love to see more games like this. But as is, Sekimeiya is a dense gem that isn't thrilling, lacks character, and doesn't have engaging dialogue. When you're engaged in the story and mystery, Sekimeiya is a worthwhile, well-crafted experience, but this comes at the expense of nearly everything else. With characters that are primarily an afterthought, an overly dense writing style, and decisions that effectively make it so you have to theorize to enjoy the game, there are a lot of caveats that you need to be aware of before you start playing. As a person whose favorite visual novels reside in communities like Reikaze City, I was expecting to really love this. Instead, I found that Sekimeiya's appeal is even narrower than the games that have inspired it. I still had a good time, but I couldn't help but think that Sekimeiya is anything but a flawed gem. Reikaze Reviews gives it a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. If you want more of my content, please follow me on Medium and Noisy Pixel, where I'll post articles and reviews. If you want more of my thoughts, follow me on Twitter, where I'll have random long threads about stuff no one really cares about in the middle of the night. And if you want to hang out or talk to me directly, I have a Discord server linked in the description below. I appreciate you all for watching and getting to this point. This has been Reikaze Reviews, signing off. P.S. A mini review of the development book that is a Kickstarter award. It's a good read and is deeply interesting. I think it explains a lot of why the game is the way it is, and it definitely helped me appreciate the game more. If you got the development book, I'd highly recommend reading it.